The most powerful weapon on Earth is the human soul on fire. Welcome to the complete build video for the Balrog build, my fiery demon that shreds enemies and is a menace in both PvP and PvE. For those who didn't see the original video, check out the first update video on the build. A lot of that video was theory crafting and small amounts of experimenting, but now I have a great sample size of getting to 60 late game content and a few dozen wars, as with this build I've been able to make a name for myself on my server as a top PvP player. If you're interested in this build, be sure to check out my Twitch at twitch.tv/redloff, where I live stream it constantly, or like and subscribe here. Today, we are going to expand on that previous video, cover once again the pros and cons, but also go more into a guide on how to build this, alternatives you can run with this, playstyle, and more. Without further ado, let's talk about the Balrog build, the Firestaff plus Hatchet/Greataxe monster. First things first, this is an intelligence conversion build. What that means is our primary stat will be intelligence, and then it is a requirement that on our Hatchet and Greataxe, we get intelligence conversion gems. This allows us to maximize our Firestaff damage while still pumping in good damage and utility with our Hatchet and Greataxe, but more on attributes later. The greatest strength of this build is its versatility. You can lean more into mage and put out higher DPS. You can lean more into tank CC and have the Firestaff be a nice damage over time piece while frontlining. The actual playstyle of this setup is up to you. You have range, melee, and great mobility. This is a jack of all trades build. I can put out crazy damage, one-shot backliners and more. Now, I'll never be top DPS as of now. Maybe with like perfect weapons and the war going the best way for me, I could get there. But that's alright, because unlike the mages who are top DPS, when someone jumps me on the back line, I can 1v1 them and win. So, pros and cons with it. The way I have been playing it as of recently is playing a backline killer. Due to the mobility and great CC, either the Greataxe pulls or the Hatchet roots, I can lock down backliners and kill them easily. And if I get collapsed on, I have a great escape chance with burnout. I also played it as a frontliner too, and as a mage. Both worked well, I just had to respec a bit for those. So this leads us into one thing you might be asking is, how does a 3-weapon build work? In this case, we always run Firestaff, and then swap between Greataxe and Hatchet depending on what we are doing both in PvP and in PvE. For PvE, I will say this quickly that I almost exclusively run Hatchet during PvE. This is mainly because the Hatchet has great self-sustain with Berserk, so it just makes it a lot easier to run PvE. For PvP, there's a few factors in what I think of when deciding between the two weapons. We'll start with open world PvP. The factors there are what I'm playing with. If I have a group of players I'm running with, I'll see what we have. If we have little to no healers, I'll run Hatchet for self-sustain. If we have little to no CC, I'll run Greataxe for Gravity Well and Reap. You typically just need to see how these are playing out to decide, since so much of open world PvP is scrappy that you just have to feel it out. For wars, we'll need to break it down for offense and defense. However, if I find myself in a main Zerg on a point, I might run a Hatchet for the sustain while on point. For defensive wars, if I'm part of a main Zerg rotating point to point, I'll run Greataxe to get Gravity Wells down on major hits. If I'm playing a flag where I have to sit on a point for instance, I'll run Hatchet to give me better DPS while I'm on the point fighting off large waves of them while waiting for rotations. I will say though, this build, at least how I spec it, is not the best for being a point holder. Mobility is the name of the game with this build, so try to be a rotator. Lastly, for all PvP, you can fill in the void of mage on your team if you wish. Plenty of times I've sat in the back and purely used Firestaff. Again, jack of all trades build, be flexible with what you want to do. Now that we've covered gameplay, let's break down the skills, attributes, and gear setup. First, the passives for the Firestaff will be running Pillar Fire, Fireball, and Burnout. These are the 3 core abilities. As you can tell also, we're not taking any ultimate passives. The Rune of Helios, we just don't get enough because we're moving so much. And we don't get enough points in Reheat, but I also think Reheat is bad anyway, so that's fine. We're going to take both points in the Pillar of Fire of First Strike And for Arson's advantage, I think these are really good and useful. For Fireball, we're only taking Scorched Earth because Catch, we don't have issues with mana too bad with this build. So I'm not going to stress a lot with the mana because we're only running on one magic item. And we're going to be running Spell Focus, which heavy attacks restore mana. With also, on top of that, Flare, which heavy attacks no longer consume mana. So we're not too stressed about mana with this build. And then lastly, for Burnout, we're going to take both passives of All In and heat it up. All In's alright. I'm not too stressed about All Ins. The cooldowns are fine for it, especially if you like run through a huge mob at a war. But heat it up we want just because of the extra distance for more mobility to get us in and out of big clusters. And then lastly, for the random passes around, Fire Restoration is nice. Again, a little cooldown reduction. We're going to be running heavy attacks anyways. Clear Mind is good because we're aiming to stay above 50% mana. So as long as you're staying above 50%, we're in a good spot. Singe is good because, again, we're going to crit on this build, like we mentioned briefly. So we're going to get crit. So any crit hits with this and everything else just really adds and adds more on and stacks together. So always keep an eye out for crit chance gear and all that for the Firestaff. And this also goes into chance with Spellslinger. And then lastly, Prophet of the Fire God ties into that as well. So these three crit passives, we're going to build crit on top of the Firestaff in our gear, and it just kind of really sinks in well together. They have these strong heavy attack abilities that restore mana that we can use with some cooldown stuff on top of our abilities. And then on the Pyromancer side, we'll take Pyromania because we're low health decent amount because we're melee, so we'll be getting a lot of focus, so that just helps a little bit when we are low anyways. Let It Burn, Fortify, again, melee build oftentimes, so it's just nice to have Fortify. Kindle with Burning. I mean, I feel like this is just a must-have on any Firestaff build. And then lastly, Combat Speed, Haste, high mobility build. We can throw these abilities, burn in and out, and then also get haste on top of that, which is really big. So those are the passives for Firestaff. For Hatchet, the three abilities we're running is Feral Rush, Berserk, our bread and butter on this, and Raging Torrent. We're going to go almost exclusively into Berserker minus one passive, if you can tell. Berserker is just so much better, and since we're running Firestaff with the Hatchet, we don't need the range of the throwing tree, so that's pretty useless. The only passive that we're taking in the throwing tree is Critical Throw, and that's purely because of the critical hit chance of all attacks by 5%, so just a little crit chance increase, which I find more valuable than Relentless Fury, which is after a successful heavy attack, you gain Empower. The Empower is nice, and you could swap Relentless Fury for Frenzied Purge. I go back and forth between the two, just depending on what I'm doing. But I think the Empower is nice, especially with some of the perks that we'll be running later, but it's not necessary. Berserk, we're taking everything. We want the movement speed, we want the health back on portion, we got to remove the crowd control, and we want the uninterruptible attacks. That's really important for just having high mobility, self-sustain in wars, being able to attack quickly, and maybe swap over to your Firestaff and burn out away. Really good. Feral Rush is also important, mainly because of the crippling strikes. The damage is good on this ability, but being able to hit someone in the back on the back line and immobilize them, and then you can deal your damage with your hatchet, throw your Raging Torrent down, and then when they run away, swap to your Firestaff and finish them off. I think it's a good combo. And of course, Defy Death is our ultimate passive. Everyone takes this passive on Hatchet. It's just so strong. Being able to go down to 50 HP and gain mortality for 3 seconds is really good. It can be really clutch with escaping and getting away from that situation, buying you time, or finishing off enemies. So highly recommend. For Raging Torrent, we're going to be taking both the passive, Aggressive Approach, and Final Blow. Just added damage on this, added increased movement speed on this. Again, more mobility, more DPS. There's no reason not to take this. And then the other passives, Accumulate Power. We're going to be light attacking a lot, so running a lot of these light attack passives, it's good. Stay within range strikes. Desperate Refresh. We melee build going in and out. We'll be getting a lot of damage taken, so slight cooldown reduction is nice, especially when you're in Defy Death, having that cooldown reduction. Against All Odds, again, we're backline diving or in a giant group of enemies, kind of diving on the points, so 10% for each enemy is nice, and can't complain about that. Fortifying Strikes, again, we're light attack focus on this, so 3 attacks on the same target, which happens a lot, is nice to get that fortified. And then lastly, Frenzied Purge, we mentioned before, when you're below 30 HP, remove all those effects. That's a nice thing to run. However, if you want, you can drop this to go with Relentless Fury, then instead get Empower, and you would start with a heavy attack and then go light after. But either way, those are the passives for the Hatchet. As you can tell, the 3 abilities, Charge, Reap, and Gravity Well. We'll start on the Mauler side of things because it's a bit shorter. Gravity Well, bread and butter for this kind of backline diving. You want this to have the throw down, and we'll also be having crowded well, just because the increased burst damage for each 10% is nice, because again, we're kind of a backline, not assassin per se, but we are more DPS. Unyielding is pretty good. There are some passives you could drop if you want to take Unyielding, but I personally do not take it. But the Fortify is no joke, so don't be afraid to take it. Mauler's Resolve. We took Enduring Strikes. It's not the greatest, but we needed to because we're not taking Maelstrom or Whirlwind, so we need to take that to get the passive down for Gravity Well. Gravity is nice because we have a lot of pull abilities, and then Revenge is nice in case you need a block on the point. It kind of just gives you a reason to be able to block with it if you're kind of being crowded around, but you could drop Revenge if you wanted to take something different. For Charge, as you can tell, we don't take either of the passives. Charge's hitbox is really funky in my opinion, and I don't like it that much, so I personally don't take the rest of it because I don't really need it. Reap, we do take all the passives. Increasing the range is nice. Healing yourself is really nice. And then lastly, the little spin attack. Might as well do a little flare attack at the end and get that DPS. And for the ultimate passive, Bloodlust, it helps a lot with this high mobility, diving on the back lines, not having to stress out about those things. There's no real reason not to take it. And then for the passives, Greed, we're light attack focus on this. We want that. Now, being able to penetrate armor is nice with Death's Embrace. Critical gains, we're crit focus on this build, as mentioned before, with the Firestaff and with the Hatchet. We are crit focus, so take critical gains. We're going to be getting crit gear if we can. Frustration is pretty good when you're diving backline. They are often hold block on you until they can get their cooldowns back up, so it's good to be able to hit that. Keen Edge, no, again, crit damage, we want that, we need it. Again, with critical ignition with the 30% less, and with feed with 30% left. Since we are backline diving, often ways this works out is we throw Gravity Well down, we hop to Firestaff, throw our abilities on that Gravity Well, burn out in, swap to Greataxe, Reap, slam down some AoE basic attacks, ideally finish them off with critical condition and feed, and then we can charge out or some variation of that. So that is the setup though that we are running with the Greataxe. So this is what we're going to be running attribute wise. At the moment, we're at 50 strength, 279 intelligence, 100 constitution. In an ideal world, when we get our maxed out gear, you can have up to 450 points. And so when we do that, we'll have 50 strength, 300 intelligence, and 100 constitution. That's going to be the ideal situation that we run with this build. The 50 strength is nice just because our Hatchet and Greataxe contribute from it, and we get that 5% damage to melee attacks. I think it's useful. I think building up that base damage for your melees is really good with the conversion, and kind of rocking this is nice. The 300 intelligence, again, we're primarily intelligence with the intelligence conversion gems on our melee, so we want to have high intelligence. 300 is kind of the minimum. You could theoretically, if you want to play around with it, go drop your strength and just get 350 intelligence with 100 constitution if you want. You can kind of play around with it. I still am playing around with it and want to see how the game changes with late game gear and everything, but I think 50 strength and 300 intelligence will be the way to go. But just depending on your playstyle, you can drop the strength if you want and increase your intelligence, or you could even go to 50 dex for the crit chance. So it's kind of up to you and what you want to do. The 300 intelligence, while itself isn't that impactful, like the 30% damage on first hit to full health target, doesn't happen a lot, but just getting more and more like just raw intelligence is important for this build. And then lastly, with Constitution, running this is really just kind of just making sure you get your base health up. Alright, in terms of armor and perks that we want to rock, we're going heavy armor. As you can tell here, I have an Orichalcum at the moment. Obviously, eventually we'll get Void Bent. Overall, heavy armor is the way to go with this build. We do a lot of melee, we do a lot of range, so kind of being protective with that versatility is nice. In terms of what you want on the gear, obviously the big thing is intelligence. If you can't get full intelligence, intelligence con is important. End of the day, when you have perfect armor, you're gonna have the 450 points, so it doesn't matter too much on what is on the armor, but you're focused on intelligence and or constitution. On top of that, in terms of gems you want to rock in your armor, it kind of changes based off the meta, but at the moment I run a lot of diamond, onyx, or opal. I think those three are the best overall defensive ones to kind of cover your bases. In terms of what I run weapon wise with it, I run opal on my Firestaff just because I'm constantly not at full stamina, so it's really nice. And then obviously with my Hatchet and Greataxe, an intelligence conversion gem is going to be the name of the game. The specific one just kind of depends on what you have. I run like Void on my Hatchet and Void on my Greataxe actually at the moment, but it's kind of up to you on what you want that damage conversion based on what you're seeing a lot of people running in terms of defense. I would recommend not doing fire or ice conversion though, because a lot of people will put fire and ice absorption on their armor just with how much damage mages do with Firestaff and Ice Gauntlet. So I definitely recommend at least avoiding those two in terms of gems to run on your weapons. Jewelry, just best gear score, intelligence, focus, and we can get into perks actually off of that. So perks, what we want. The Hatchet, Keen Berserk, or Refreshing Torrent. Those two are really good for the Hatchet, and that's how we play. We don't need like the throwing one, so getting those is just really nice to kind of buff up those core abilities that we use. Additionally, outside the Keen Berserk or Refreshing Torrent, you could also go Rogue, Lifestealing, or Mortal Lifesteal. Rogue and Lifestealing are really good in PvP right now. They're really strong with this build and how it operates and everything, so recommend those. Or you could also swap on the chain damage. Now just as a note, if you have a chain damage, you will have to have the gem conversion match that. So if you have chain void, you have to do a void conversion gem. You can't do chain void and convert your damage to arcane. You have to match that, just as a note. With Greataxe, I like Crippling Reap and Insatiable Gravity Well. I think those two are the best perks for Greataxe abilities, and I like getting perks for abilities overall, especially Insatiable Gravity Well, because it's already so strong. Just getting that damage with Gravity Well back as health is just really, really good, and just helps keep you alive. You can also rock Rogue, Lifestealing, or one of the chain abilities as well on Greataxe if you can or want to, but I think Crippling Reap and Insatiable Gravity Well are really strong for getting Greataxe perks. For the Firestaff, Empowering Fireball when it's fixed is really good. So at the moment it's bugged, but when that gets fixed, that will be a top priority ability for this build. But you can also run Refreshing Pillar of Fire if you want to rock it that way. That's also not a bad perk. Efficient Burnout finally is not terrible. Like if you get an Efficient Burnout perk, don't stress it, but it's not necessarily the most important one. In terms of general perks that we want outside like the weapons, Refreshing, Resilient, and Freedom are the three most important ones in my opinion. Refreshing, just having that max cooldown reduction is just really nice. It kind of helps just stay alive a bit easier. With Resilience, while it's no longer bugged, Resilient is still good with the critical hits just dealing less damage to you. And since you're going to be in the backline, you might be getting crit hit a decent amount from all the DPS in the backline. So it's just nice to have that reduced a bit. And then lastly, Freedom. I'm not a surprised one. Slow, Stun, and Silence expires 3% faster. It's nice to have on top of a hatchet just because it helps you just almost always be free in terms of CC. It just helps you get out of stuff a lot faster. So those are my 2-3 general ones. For amulets, getting empowered I think is really good with our abilities. Empowered on the amulet, just with Greataxe and Hatchet already giving a lot of empowered with their passives, just getting that on top of it's really good. And then lastly, on the ring, fire damage, slash damage are pretty good, but the top priority on rings at the moment is actually Key Awareness. Key Awareness giving you that 3% crit chance is just really good because again, we are a crit build. We're trying to get crit damage out off of our melee and Firestaff. That's how we have it built in the attributes. So be sure if you can, Keen Awareness is really good. Just get that extra crit chance and be able to max out your damage. So those are the perks that we want. That's the build. Overall, I felt that I finally got the chance to really fine tune this build, and even I don't have it perfectly complete. It's been really fun trying to perfect it with gear and attributes, and I'm really excited to see it perfected with all of that. So let me know what you think and if you test it out. Thanks for watching.